The Cabin in the Woods is one of my favorite horror movies, and I would like to think that I'm not the only one when I say that this might be one of the most interesting horror movies that we have ever gotten. The critics seem to love it, and anybody who's a fan of the horror genre and has watched this movie absolutely loves it. And the two main reasons for this reception are 1. The unique premise of this movie, and 2. How it utilizes its unique premise to give you so much more substance than you would typically get from a horror movie. So let's start with reason number 1, the unique premise of this movie. The movie starts out as a very formulaic story about a group of teenagers who go for a road trip and end up staying in an abandoned house which is haunted. But within this setup, the movie also sneaks in an agent who keeps an eye on them and is reporting to somebody. And you also get to see a force field that is supposed to keep anybody who visits this house isolated and locked in. Later on, you also find out that there are a group of scientists who are constantly keeping an eye on everything these teenagers do in the house, perfectly teasing you with the idea of there being so much more going on. And the movie utilizes this unique premise masterfully. First off, by how it gives us familiar horror movie cliches that we love to watch, but in a completely different way than we initially expected. For example, this movie gives you the incredibly horny, very playful and seductive lady who just wants to make love and does something in the movie that has dire consequences for everybody else cliche with Jules. But the movie also reveals the fact that the scientists who are watching all of this have doused some chemicals in her hair which makes her behave so impulsively and thus gets her killed and puts her boyfriend's life in danger. Another very tried and true horror movie trope is when characters find a hidden basement which usually contains an ancient artifact or a talisman, an amulet, a book, something which has some demonic ties to it, and the characters accidentally activate it because of their idiocy. It's generally a very contrived scene, but in this movie you get the exact same scene. The bunker door magically opens, the characters walk into the room filled with all these artifacts, and they impulsively look at each and every one of them. But the twist is that each and every single one of these artifacts have ties to some demonic entity, and these scientists are basically just letting these characters choose how they are going to die, and are also actively placing bets on which demon these guys are going to choose. Again, it offers you the familiar tropes of a horror movie, but just twists it in a way that just makes it feel fresh and exciting. And another thing that I have to point out is how this movie also makes fun of these horror movie tropes the way you and I would.
What the hell was that?
The wind must have blown it over.
That makes what kind of sense?
And another scene is when Chris Hemsworth says that they have to stick together, which goes against what the scientists really wanted to happen. So they spray him with some kind of chemical that alters his thinking, and now he tells everybody to split up so they can lock down the house much faster. Again, this movie loves pointing out how absurd and stupid some parts of the horror movie genre really are, which just makes it stand out from the crowd that much more. And finally, probably the most important point is how the movie utilizes its unique premise to give you everything you wanted from a horror movie: the brutal deaths of characters who make stupid decisions and you are actively rooting for them to die, the hidden creepy basement, two characters falling in love before one of them is just ruthlessly killed off by the monster. It gives you everything, but it also consistently shows you that almost every action these characters take are heavily manipulated by the scientists who are watching them and are actively rooting for them to die. They are placing bets on how these clueless people are going to die. They are throwing a party and being absolutely joyous while in the background this poor girl is getting the tar beaten out of her by this absolute horse of a zombie. And these little twists that the movie gives you not only gives you a much more satisfying version of those horror movie cliches, but also have a brilliant payoff at the third act. Because instead of these two characters either successfully escaping the monster or dying a tragic and gruesome death like you would expect from a movie like this, instead these two survivors end up finding out that everything tragic that has happened to them were because of these group of scientists. And now the third act becomes a revenge mission plot, which again is just such a fresh and different plot progression compared to every other horror movie. And you also get a cameo fest of some incredibly badass looking monsters. And on top of all of that, you also get some additional commentary about the horror movie audience. At this point, we all know that there are people like me who watch a horror movie just for the thrill of it and are cruelly rooting for the monster to brutally rebuff the characters in the movie from existing. And these scientists are in many ways a stand-in for people like me, people who are so cruelly rooting for the monster. And this movie is basically showing people like me how absurd and destructive that really is. Because towards the end of the movie, it is revealed that the main reason for these scientists manipulating these group of teenagers into acting a certain way was because these teenagers were sacrificial lambs who were being offered to an ancient god in order to keep the planet safe. But because these two people had to endure so much suffering and were being used so cruelly by these group of scientists, who again are a stand-in for the sadistic horror fans like me, these two just decide to let the world be destroyed and just talk about how humans are just way too cruel and decide that it's better if we die and let somebody else have a go. And you can't blame them. They, in many ways, are the victims of cruelty we as horror fans crave, so they let the world burn. And me and you, as the horror fans who crave this cruelty, now don't get the satisfaction of watching the world be saved and instead are left with this bleak and horrifically crushing ending of watching the ancient god arise ready to destroy the world, which is one of the best endings that we have ever gotten to any movie. And these exact reasons of having a unique premise that simultaneously delivers the goods of what you want from a horror movie, but also gives you so much more of the things you didn't even realize that you wanted, is what makes The Cabin in the Woods one of my favorite horror movies. With that being said, I hope you really enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to drop a like. And if you're a fan of the kind of content that I'm putting out, then make sure to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a fantastic day. Goodbye.